Hello, Internet! Welcome to episode 54 of Funny Book Splatter, a horror comics podcast brought to you by HorrorTalk.com. I am your host, James Ferguson. This week's guest is Chris Fenoglio, the artist of Goosebumps, Monsters at Midnight, from IDW Publishing. If you've listened to more than one episode of Funny Book Splatter, you'll know how much of an influence Goosebumps was on an entire generation of horror comics creators. This series is pretty great and captures that flair that made the original young adult novel so great. A large part of that is from Chris's artwork. You could pick up all 3 issues of Goosebumps Monsters at Midnight at your local comic shop or digitally through Comixology and Amazon Kindle. The trade paperback collection is scheduled for release on March 28th. Chris can be found online on Twitter and Instagram as @ChrisFenoglio. Fun fact, he told me the easy way to remember how to pronounce his last name is that it rhymes with cornholio. In Kickstarter news, past guest Joseph Oliveira just launched the campaign for a new anthology comic called Folk Tales of the Cryptids. I got an advanced look at it, and it is pretty creepy stuff, so definitely check it out. And in other news, my other podcast, Raging Nerdon, has returned from a brief hiatus. We basically ran out of stuff to talk about, so we just kind of took some time off. Join me and co-host BJ Boothe as we talk about the latest comic book movie trailers, a lot of stuff about Venom, and wow, that was something. And for some reason, Stan Lee's genitals. Check it out wherever you get your podcasts. Alright, now let's get right into episode 54 of Funny Book Splatter with my guest, Chris Fenoglio. Alright, so usually what happens when I start the show is I ask the creator to pitch their book and kind of explain it to the audience, but I feel like Goosebumps doesn't really need that much of an introduction. But I know Monsters at Midnight is kind of like a specific story told underneath the Goosebumps brand, but how would you kind of describe that book to someone maybe that's just kind of like walking in off the street?
Just like the Monsters at Midnight thing, or the book, like Goosebumps as a whole?
If they need to explain what Goosebumps is as a whole, there's a bigger problem there. But let's do Monsters at Midnight specifically. We'll get to Goosebumps definitely.
It's really just man, I really don't know. That's the problem talking to writers or artists, is they don't really think about, how to sell their book. They're just like, oh, I just draw pretty pictures. I guess it's just kind of like it's basically about 2 girls who get trapped in Horrorland and basically have to find their way out. Mm-hmm. And they keep getting, thrown around by, spoilers for the first issue, but Slappy, the ventriloquist dummy, and kind of, run through all these weird different hijinks and get to explore Horrorland for a little while.
Now, Goosebumps is an incredibly influential series of books. So what I'm continually surprised by is how often it comes up on this show. It seems to have influenced an entire generation of horror fans that went on to then create their own horror stories. Again, this is probably a dumb interview question, but was Goosebumps something you were into as a kid?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I'm a little older than I'm a little old, so I'm 34, and so Goosebumps.
So am I. We're at the same level there. I feel like Goosebumps was like right around the time I was just getting more into reading and everything. So I was like, oh, okay, this is something I should look at.
See, I feel like I was a little beyond Goosebumps when they came out. Like I was already reading like bigger books. Like R.L. Stine had another series called Fear Street. Did you ever read any of those?
I dabbled with them, but not as much as I had gotten into Goosebumps.
Right, and I was reading a bunch of those. Mm-hmm. So I read a couple of Goosebumps. Well, I mean, I read a bunch of Goosebumps books because at the time I was just reading anything I could get my hands on. But I feel like they were just like ever so slightly behind me. Like if I was a year or two younger, I would have just, destroyed all of them. But yeah, I think they were just kind of, they were a lot of people's introduction into horror, especially horror literature stuff, because, we were all way too young for things like Stephen King or anything like that. And it kind of hit us all at the right age, I think.
Yeah, there hasn't been a ton of that kind of young adult horror lately. I think like that we need a new Goosebumps, and which is kind of a bummer. But hopefully the comic will help reinvigorate that franchise.
I hear there's a lot of stuff about vampires who like to glitter, but I don't think it's quite the same.
Yeah,
thing.
And I feel like that's kind of run its course too. It's not the that was a few years ago, and now it's like, all right, what else you got? It's not even like fun to like poke fun at that anymore. Like I feel like that's like, all right, yeah, that was a punchline for like 10 years or so, and it's like, all right, let's move on. We had our fun.
Yeah, you're probably right. But there's not really, there's young adult horror. My point is like there's young adult horror books or young adult themed, books with, werewolves and vampires and stuff like that. But they're not just straight up horror. They're usually kind of twisting the genre on its head a little bit. You know what I mean? So even like Harry Potter has horror elements to it, but I wouldn't ever call that a horror book. You know what I mean? Yeah,
it's more fantasy sort, magic and whatnot. But there's some spooky elements. Like I feel like that often happens to me when I'm looking at books to cover at Horror Talk. I'm like, well, this is kind of spooky or like whatever. Like, is it technically horror? Like sci-fi could almost be horror because you're dealing with like crazy alien monsters or something, but. It could be a bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
But in Monsters at Midnight, I think you kind of deal with. It seems like a lot of the classics with Goosebumps between Slappy the dummy. I saw Monster Blood was in the second issue. There's all these different and a ridiculous amount of monsters and a very impressive amount of a variety there. Do you have a favorite monster or creature that you've been drawing in this book so far?
There's a couple of them. And it's usually the ones that you see repeated because they're the ones I just want to draw. Like the big fur. Have you read issue 2 yet?
Yeah. That was I had reviewed I didn't get a chance to review the first issue, but I had reviewed the second one and really liked it.
That's right. The big furry guy with one eye. For some reason, I really like drawing him. And then there's like another big like lizard guy I really like drawing. I threw like a Grim Reaper looking guy in there in a couple of panels too. He was fun to draw also.
Now, are those kind of set like so? The writer Jeremy Lambert, does he tell you like, all right, we need to include these kind of monsters, or is it just like fill this page with monsters and you just kind of go nuts?
It was kind of fill this page with monsters, and I was just like, oh crap! All right, let's see. Grim Reaper's kind of scary, and then that new. What's that new Guillermo del Toro movie?
Shape of Water?
The Shape of Water. Yeah, okay, we could throw a few lizard men in there, and then just kind of like, all right, just grasping at straws and seeing what works.
Yeah, I mean, like in the second issue, there's like a literal parade of monsters of all shapes and sizes there. So I'm just imagining, so you're just like Googling monsters or scary crap and just seeing what kind of comes up.
I really don't appreciate you giving away all my secrets. I'm just like, all right. I need this, and this looks good. And zombies, those are cool right now, right? All right, zombies. We need a zombie in there.
I particularly like the garden gnome and the skeleton with a mohawk, because I feel like those are like, all right, like, wasn't expected. I'm sorry, no, there's 2 garden gnomes. Oh, man.
Well, the Mohawk skeleton, that's actually, his name's Curly, and he's actually a Goosebumps guy.
About him.
Like, he's one of their branding, like one of their mascot branding people. It's like the big characters are Slappy and that guy, Curly.
So aside from Slappy, were there any, and Curly then, were there other characters that were like mandated by the Goosebumps license or something?
No, we snuck in a lot of little Easter eggs into the first issue, but after that we kind of pulled back on them. Not for any specific reason, just because we just did. I don't know. But there's like in the first issue, I think some of the book titles are titles of Goosebumps books. And then there's Monster Blood in there, obviously. And I think even Camp Jelly Jam, which is like on the first page, like they make a mention of it on the first page, that's somehow referencing one of the Goosebumps books also.
Yeah, it's now I'm just imagining like a big like encyclopedia of them, and like, all right, we got to mention all these things, and you know how can we shoehorn in the haunted mask or something like that to put in there. But I mean, there was I don't even know how many total Goosebumps books there were, but I mean dozens and dozens of them. Sure, like there's a wealth of information to kind of pull from there.
And they weren't just like on one. It wasn't like it's all about vampires or it's all about, one sort of monster or anything. They kind of ran the gamut. It was like, I remember there was one about bees, and then there's another one about superheroes. And then I think there was another one about like phantom piano playing hands or something like that. Right. And so it's kind of hard to squeeze all of that into like a single
even
thing.
with a big amusement park like Horrorland, it's not like you're gonna have the B section or something. It's like that wouldn't necessarily work as well.
Yeah. You have werewolves in one section and ghosts in another section, and they're like, oh, and this is the bee part. It's like, bees, really?
Yeah, I feel like Horrorland has to be reserved for more of the supernatural elements. So.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
But so far it's pretty cool. Just one. From a nostalgia sake, it's cool to see, characters like Slappy and stuff come in and still be spooky and everything. But on the other hand, like, it just works from a cool story. You have these two young girls that get pulled into a literal amusement park for horror stuff, which, as an adult sounds awesome, but, would kind of freak out a kid.
Yeah, probably. I'm not really the biggest fan of haunted houses myself, so I feel their pain right now.
But I think your artwork speaks to a nice kind of blend, is kind of tailor-made for a book like Goosebumps, in that it's I don't want to use the word cartoony because I feel like that has a somewhat negative connotation sometimes, but it does work well with this kind of story where it's like, all right, you can have some spooky elements while not like totally freaking out something. Like if a severed head comes through there, it's not going to be gushing blood and everything. I mean, I think there's in that monster parade we mentioned, there's a bouncing like zombie head that's in there, but it's not like, spewing brains and everything out there. So it's a nice kind of happy medium that you could share this with your kids and they would be, oh yeah, this is cool, a cool way to kind of introduce them to monsters.
Yeah, and you can use the term cartoony. I don't take offense to that. That was kind of the point. I mean, when Sarah, the editor, Sarah Gatos, and I'm probably butchering her name, speaking of butchering names, when she tagged me for the project, she was like, look, they've come out with comics and stuff of Goosebumps before, but it's always been geared towards people who read them as a kid, and they were trying to, age them up a little bit. You know what I mean? And you see that with kind of everything. They want a gritty version of whatever, He-Man, Thundercats, X, Y, and Z. And she was like, we just really want it straight across the board. We want this to be an all ages book. We want, kids to pick this up. That's who we're trying to tag here, not necessarily adults. And so I was like, okay, well, I mean, that's kind of my bread and butter. I do more cartoony kind of kid-oriented stuff because that's the stuff that interests me. And, that's just sort of where I went with it. It wouldn't make sense for this to be, blood and guts and gore necessarily, especially if that was the audience we were going for.
Yeah, and I'm so glad to hear that's coming from editorial too, because we need more books like this. I have 2 kids, so I want them to be able to enjoy this kind of stuff. They love monsters and things like that. So, but it's tough to find books like this that you can share with them because it's, they usually kind of, they're too scary, and like, or you end up questioning it like, all right, is this, are they old enough for this, or, do we have to wait a few years? But I feel like the Goosebumps books, at least the comics here, are made for them to kind of, it really is an all ages book, so anyone could do it, and I had a great time with it, but then I know that, if I showed this to my kids, they would be able to enjoy it too.
Yeah, and I just think comics in general need more all ages books. I mean, every comic reader I've ever met, like very few of them logged on, in their 20s. Almost all of them were like, I started when I was 6, or I started when I was 10, or something like that. I think we should use the tobacco tobacco industry's motto and hook them while they're young, you know.
Probably not the great, the best analogy we could use when talking about kids comics.
But I mean, that was just the whole point. Is like they were looking for an all ages book, so I was like, okay, well, I can do that. That's definitely my wheelhouse. And it actually I got a little bit of blowback on it. Like, I read the reviews for the first issue, and a lot of people were like, it's too cartoony, it's not creepy enough, X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, I wasn't really going for that, but okay. So.
Well, yeah, that's not the vibe. If someone was saying that from a review, then they didn't get it to begin with, and they were expecting that grim, gritty reboot of Goosebumps, and that's not what this is setting out to do in the first place. So, yeah,
I think that's fair.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of dumb people out there, so unfortunately, can't please everyone. And sometimes, those books just aren't for them. Like, all right, if you want that grim, gritty thing, there's a million other books out there that scratch that itch. Yeah,
The Walking Dead exists. So, I mean, I don't feel like we need to do that in this book necessarily.
So that is kind of like your style here. This is right in your wheelhouse. Is that how do you approach drawing the kind of monsters that show up here? Do you have like do you go through Google image search and kind of find like inspiration for that kind of stuff, or are you kind of pulling from your own imagination just to kind of create crazy monsters?
A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. I definitely run dry when it comes to like coming up with new ideas for like monsters and things, especially when you have to do a literal parade of them. So you kind of like go back and you're all right, well, what else is out there? And some of them I just, I might like, an example is the part in the swamp when they're attacked by the fish people. I knew I wanted it to kind of look like the old, what's it called? The creature from the Black Lagoon kind of monster. But I mean, for the life of me, I couldn't remember what that looked like. Like I had an idea, but it wasn't, I needed to look it up again and be like, oh yeah, that's right. He has fish lips and he has scales and this, that, and the other thing, little pointy things. So it's a little bit of, it's a mix, and I might ask, Jeremy is a little bit more, the writer, Jeremy, is a little bit more into the monster stuff than I am. So I might email him real quick and be like, what else do you want in here?
Has there been anything that you're like adamant about that, like when you're talking about monsters or including in the book, they're like, no, it's like, what's going to be really great is, the lizard people or something, like, regardless of what we do, we got to make sure we have this in the book.
No, not really. The lizard people kind of came from cover design, because the way that comics work is you do the covers months before you actually get to the issue, because, diamond distribution and all that fun stuff. So I kind of I threw out a design idea where they were being attacked by fish people. And it was like, oh, that's a great idea. I'm going to write it into the script. So it wasn't so much like this needs to be in here as it was this would make a cool cover, and he kind of worked it into the story.
Hopefully sell some books there. And at least it's included in the story. Like I get really annoyed when they have something on the cover that's either that's completely irrelevant to the story, or something that conversely spoils the big reveal in the book. It's like, well, that you kind of blew it for me. Like, this would have been a cool reveal, but you just put it right on the front.
Yeah, I don't like either of those things either. And a lot of the stuff I've done, like I did the X-Files Origins series as well. They wanted more narrative covers as opposed to just like, Spider-Man doing a cool thing on a building or something like that. Iconic covers, I guess you'd call them. So it's a weird mix, because you have to pick a moment that is exciting enough to sell the book, but is also not spoilery enough to where people feel like they get the whole story.
Yeah, it's like cutting the perfect trailer for a movie without revealing too much.
Exactly.
So do you do a lot of covers as well, or are you mainly doing interiors?
Depends on what people will pay me for.
You're open for either.
That's right. I am a mercenary. I will do anything. I did a cover for issue either 4 or 5. I'm not sure what they're going to use it for. Of the Goosebumps thing, because they're doing it like a anthology series. So after 3 issues, they change creative teams. They asked me to do a cover for that. But for the most part, it seems like people want me to do interiors. And honestly, I think I do that a little bit better than, cool covers. But I mean, it's up to you. Your opinion may differ.
No, you're the 3-issue setup. Like I like that. It's all right. I like that, and I don't like that, because like I've already become attached to your work on here, and I'm like, oh, I want to see what else you can do with this license. Would you be interested in doing more stories within the Goosebumps brand?
Yeah, I would, definitely. I mean, this has got to be the most fun I've ever had on any project I've ever done.
That's awesome. I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah. Well, because I feel like it fits my style, like, really, really well, and I'm able to have a little bit more of that cartoony edge to it, but at the same time, draw some weird, cool, creepy stuff too. And when you're just first starting out as an artist, like, you kind of you don't always get to pick your jobs. It's like, well, we want to hire you to do this. And you're like, well, okay, how much you pay me? Okay. Yeah, I'll do it. So it's nice when you have a project and you're like, oh man, this feels like me.
That's great. So, yeah. So, I mean, you should be more passionate about that then, because you're able to, it's something you really want to do, and that should come out in the artwork.
Exactly. And hopefully, I feel like it did, but I don't know.
I definitely think it does, because like you could see, like, there's you right from the moment like you open this book, you can see like, oh, like this is a fun book. Like, this is, I don't want to say it's not going to take itself too seriously, but it's like you kind of know what to expect in here. It has a nice flair to it and a good energy, so it's a nice vibe that kind of comes out of it.
Oh, thank you very much.
Now, aside from things like Fear Street, were there any other, was horror something you had read a lot about as a kid, or is that something you kind of are in because of Goosebumps?
I read a lot of horror books, but I'm not really a horror guy. Like, I get scared. I get scared at movies and stuff, so I don't really watch it that much. I kind of just fell into it, I guess, because of Goosebumps, and a couple of, like, X-Files scared me as a kid. And so I never watched it. And then they were like, hey, do you want to do an X-Files book? And I was like, well, pay me how much? Yeah, sure.
I'm noticing a recurring theme here.
Yeah. Very, very, very mercenary. Yeah. But, I definitely did read a lot of Goosebumps books when I was a kid, but, like, watching it on TV and stuff, I did a little bit, but it scared me. So I was like, I'm okay. No, it's
I can understand that, though. Like, it's something, and also if you're making horror comics or stories or what have you, that it's a kind of way to kind of confront that fear. But I get, like, I didn't have a great appreciation for horror until I started writing about it in earnest. So and now I have this, like, deep appreciation for it in every medium, and understanding, oh, okay, like, this is how you can scare someone here, or there's elements of it that don't always have to be, like, in your face, terrifying and gore. There's a place for that, but there's also a place for books like Goosebumps where, it's all ages and it's fun, or you have something like Shaun of the Dead where it's just, it's a comedy, and it's okay to have that mix between horror and comedy.
I agree. And the stuff that turned me off about horror were things like the jump scares. Like, that's the stuff that I didn't really care for. Like the themes of it I always liked. And it never, it bothered me, but it didn't bother me to, like, have, like, a creepy idea in my head for, like, 3 or 4 days. It was more like that I just didn't like things jumping out at me. So it was a little bit more palatable in terms of, like, comic books or novels or something, because, you don't scare people the same way in those mediums. as you would on like TV
and
or
you
something.
You could put it down too. You know, it's tougher to get out of a theater and walk out of a movie, but you know, with a comic, all right, I can come back to this a little while, or you know, you can read it out in the open in the park or something, and it's okay.
Was that episode of Friends where he's reading like one of his sorry to ruin your podcast by talking about Friends, but Joey's reading one of the Stephen King books, and every time he gets scared, he puts it in the freezer.
See, like, I'm sure that's not like that abnormal of behavior to do. You know, if you kind of put it out of sight, out of mind, right?
Exactly. I feel where he's coming from.
Well, what aside from jump scares, was there something that just like freaked you out as a kid? Like, you know, were you scared of clowns or sharks or something?
So when I was really little, I was like 5 or 6. My parents were watching Porky's 2, and I came in the room because I wanted I came in the room because I wanted a glass of water or something, and I happened to walk in the part where the snake comes out of the toilet. So for a while in my life, I was terrified of peeing in the toilet because I thought like a snake was going to pop out and eat me. So yeah, there were a couple things. And of
all the movies that like to be scared from, it's the raunchy
2.
Sex comedy Porky's 2.
And I've seen it since, and I'm just like, oh my god, that's embarrassing.
Yeah, but I understand that. Like, the things that, like, I think I've shared this story on the show before, but, like, when I saw Jaws at a really young age, and, like, any body of water I just assumed had a shark in it. So, like, we had a pool growing up, and it was like, I'd jump in the pool, and, like, I could see the bottom of that pool, but I understand. But, like, for some reason in my head, I'm like, I'm going to get out of the pool just a little bit quicker, a little pep in my step there, because just in case there might be a shark there. Like, in the time it took when, like, I closed my eyes to jump into the pool, if a shark somehow found its way into the pool, maybe I should just be on the safe side, you know?
We used to go water skiing in freshwater lakes that weren't connected to anything. They're like in the middle of the mountains of California. And, you know, you always have that thought in the back of your head. You're like, there's a shark in there. You can't see the bottom of this lake. It's like 100 feet deep.
There has to be a shark in there, lurking in there.
There has to be a shark in there.
I like what you mentioned about X-Files, too, because I remember when that came on, it was like, oh, we're going to see some scary shit, guys. Like, it's going to be crazy. It's X-Files. And then, like, in hindsight, wasn't that spooky? Like, it's, you know, I watch that now, and it's like, all right, like, yeah, there's a couple of times where it's creepy or a little moody or something, but was this it? Was this what I was spooked out about? But, you know, I was in, like, you know, 5th grade or something, and like, oh, wow, X-Files. It's going to be aliens and monsters and stuff every week.
Well, I just think also that the line in terms of like our sophistication, not just yours and mine, like everybody's sophistication when it comes to special effects and stuff has moved so far that like you watch the first season, it's like, oh, that's a dude in a rubber mask. Like you can see it. Or like, yeah, when I first got the X-Files gig, I started watching the show, and I was just like, oh my god, this is bad. Like the special effects just look so hokey now.
Yeah, but it's funny with that too. It's like there's still a talent or appreciation for like practical effects, and you can kind of see the difference when you look at something like Jurassic Park that I think holds up pretty okay. You know, partially due to the practical effects in there. Like they had a real dinosaur head that was you know, terrorizing these kids, and that's kind of cool. And you know, you don't have that if it's all CG. You know, it wasn't the same effect when, you know, in Jurassic World that Chris Pratt is running away from like a tennis ball on a stick, and he's just reacting to it. You know?
Yeah, I totally understand that. And man, I keep watching like stuff on Jurassic Park, which is another movie that scared me when I was a kid. But just looking at it on YouTube and stuff, and I'm like, man, they still look really good. Even the CG effects look really, really good, even for today. And it's
Yeah,
20 years
20
later,
years
almost?
later. I think, yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, like they were able to, because someone described that Jurassic Park as like the last, even though it came out in the 90s, it was the last 80s movie. And I didn't really like put that together right away, but then when I thought about, all right, the practical effects and like the music and the setup for it, like, yeah, it has that kind of feel of an 80s movie that just happened to come out in the 90s. And I think, I don't know if that's something where like that they kind of caught it in the transition between good, like the practical effects and then the rush of CGI, but it just hit in such a perfect moment that, like, yeah, this all works and it's really cool and surprisingly still holds up. I mean, the sequels don't really hold up as well, but because
we don't talk about the sequels, but
excuse me. What I also didn't realize, just looking at your portfolio a bit, you had done color work on books like Red City and Bloodworth, which were books that I kind of followed. With the writer whose name I'm like totally blanking on right now, but yeah, so
Dan
like
Corey.
Fun books there, like Red City I think was like a really cool like space noir setup there. Was that kind of, I'm asking because that's like the first thing I think listed on your recent work stuff, but was that like kind of your introduction into comics?
More or less, yeah. Like I was trying to get, professionally at least. That I was trying to get gigs for a while, and that was like the first artist gig. I had a coloring or a lettering gig on another job. It was another horror book for Action Lab called The Final Plague.
I'm not familiar with that one. I'm gonna have to look that up now.
I don't think you would be. That's not a dig at you. It's more of just like, I don't think that many people read it. I recently got a check for my royalties from it, and it was a whopping $18. So I don't know if that one did too well. But yeah, I was trying to get into stuff, like trying to get into comics for a while, and I was an artist, and I eventually I met Dan at the very first Image Expo in Oakland, California, in case there's like an Oakland,
Delaware
or something. Yeah, Oakland, Delaware. There probably is an Oakland in Delaware. Anyways, I met him there, and I was just like, hey, here's my stuff, check it out. And I gave him my card and whatever else. And it was like a solid year before he, contacted me. And it was just like, hey, I got this book. I'm working with this artist. He needs a colorist. I like your color stuff. Do you want to do this? And I was like, yeah, sure. Why not? And then, so after that relationship sort of like, we did that book and it sort of worked. He wanted me to be an artist on something. So that's kind of how I started doing the Bloodworth thing too. It was just kind of, I did another interview somewhere else, and basically my career is just a stepping stone from one thing to another. Like it starts at like a lettering gig, and then gets to a coloring gig, and then gets to a bigger coloring gig, then gets to an artistic gig, and it just kind of moves up from there. And I that's just the way it seemed to work for me.
That's kind of how you do it in anything, right? Like, you're going to have to, use one gig to get the next one, to get the next one, to get the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. And each gig ideally gets progressively bigger. But I don't know. I'll let you know when I get the next gig. What the next one
that was what
be.
I was going to ask. Like, well, since Goosebumps is, you're 2 issues into a 3-issue run, the next issue comes out, it looks like in February. What do you have? What are you planning on for next?
Well, I'm finishing up Bloodworth. I'm actually drawing a page of the 4th issue right now, which is the last issue. And then, I don't know, I think McDonald's is hiring.
There's always McDonald's. What in doubt?
There's always McDonald's.
Yeah, if that comic thing doesn't work out, I mean, you could draw on their menus or something.
Yeah, there you go. That's actually
Bring
not
back,
a bad idea.
the Fry Kids and Mayor McCheese.
Do you remember a few years ago they tried to do rebrand the Hamburglar as a single dad awful. Or something? It's like, what is going on here?
This is so weird and dumb. See, I feel like that's a missed opportunity of if you want to do we talked about grim and gritty reboots, bring back Ronald McDonald and all the Fry Kids and everything, and then make some weird grim thing of that of this. You have the Hamburglar having to steal burgers to survive. Maybe he's got some sort of monster illness where it's I have to keep the monster at bay with an only. He's a hamburger vampire. That's it. And he to keep it in bay, he can only live with hamburgers instead of blood. See, this writes itself. I think we have something here. You weren't that far off. You weren't that far off with McDonald's. See, so we'll have to get them to pitch. So we'll figure that out. We'll get Ronald McDonald on the phone.
I think after Hamburglar is a single dad, they're open to kind of anything. They're just please, just help our sales. We can do. Whatever you can do. I think Ronald has been taking a back seat. They've had to put him in the, put him in the out to pasture for a little while because of all the weird creepy clown sightings, and then Stephen King's It in the theaters. They're maybe now's not the time to have a clown mascot. I'm gonna be honest. Ronald McDonald has always been creepy. Looking back at it, when you're a kid, you're just McDonald's, yay, I love Happy Meals. But looking at it now, it's that's one creepy ass clown, man.
It's no one thought no, I feel no one likes clowns. I don't think I've ever met someone that's my favorite part of the circus is obviously the clowns. It's everyone's either freaked out by them, scared by them, or just they make them sad. When you see a grown man in clown makeup, squirting around seltzer bottles and stuff, it's I'm sorry for what happened with your life. I hope you're okay. and I'm probably gonna get an angry letter from the Clown Association of America now, but I feel that's true. I feel no one really cares for them, and it's just, is it a dying profession? You think sooner or later people are just gonna be you know what, maybe we don't need clowns anymore.
I feel this interview has derailed somehow.
We asked nothing but the hard-hitting questions here at Funny Book Splatter, and I want to know what you think about clowns. News at 11.
Yeah. I honestly don't know. I don't really know what to say about clowns. I just kind of am they're people don't seem to like them anymore for whatever reason. Even that singing clown on Modern Jukebox,
Postmodern Jukebox?
It is. Postmodern Jukebox. Yeah, even he freaks me out.
What's his deal, man? I don't trust that. It's suspicious.
Yeah. Never trust a clown.
That's the lesson learned from today. That'll be what I'll put in for the show notes in here. Never trust. Chris says never trust a clown.
Never trust a clown.
Yeah, if you learn one thing from this interview, it's never trust a clown. All right. Well, look, I think that's. I think looking forward to Bloodworth, obviously, but I'm excited to see how Goosebumps wraps up, and then what else, what else you have in store for us in that final issue with it. And then it looks like the collection will be out in late March, from what I could find online. Speaking of that, are there best places to find you online, or?
I'm at Chris Fenoglio, if you can possibly spell my last name, on pretty much everything. Instagram, Twitter, I think even Facebook too. So yeah, you can always hit me up there, and I'm pretty responsive to comments and questions and all that fun stuff. And
now, do you have a place that you're frequently sharing artwork too?
Instagram mostly.
So I haven't quite wrapped my head around Instagram, but I recognize that it's probably a good place to look at cool artwork. But I just haven't made that jump. I feel like I'm too old for Instagram. I just don't get it.
Yeah, I feel like even Instagram is kind of on the outs now, because right now everybody's talking about Snapchat and stuff.
Well,
and
I definitely don't want to learn Snapchat, but I feel like that's gone back and forth because Facebook and Instagram have been kind of trying to steal from Snapchat. So I feel like that's a battle that one of them is going to end up falling to the wayside in a few years.
Yeah, I I don't think every platform needs like a story feature. No. I don't really need to see what you're eating today.
It's no offense, but friends and family. But I don't care that you had unless you ate like something really insane, like I had a walrus today. Like, all right, I want to learn more about that. But if it's just like, all right, I had a cheeseburger.
Okay, yeah.
Good on you, man. So did I.
Yeah, not that exciting.
All right, so Chris, this has been really fun. I'm glad we got to cover all the important topics, not only Goosebumps but clowns, and Instagram. Clowns. So we kind of covered all the bases there. But as I said, it looks like Goosebumps Monsters at Midnight #3 comes out on February 14th, and the collection of all 3 of your issues comes out on March 28th, both from IDW Publishing. But this has been a lot of fun, Chris. Thank you for chatting with me here on the show. But that is it then for this episode of Funny Book Splatter. I have been James Ferguson with my guest Chris Fenoglio. You've been listening to Funny Book Splatter, a horror comics podcast brought to you by HorrorTalk.com. We've been bringing you the best in horror since 2002. In addition to comics, we cover movies, TV shows, books, and video games. We've got news, reviews, guest features, interviews, unboxing videos, and much more. Be sure to sign up to Steve's Deals newsletter to increase your horror collection without breaking the bank. Check us out at HorrorTalk.com and at HorrorTalk on Twitter.